It was one of those scorching late summer afternoons where the air clung to your skin like a damp blanket, thick and oppressive. The cicadas sang in a low hum, their sound echoing in the stillness of the day. The sun hung lazily just above the tree line, casting a golden haze over the small Missouri town as the clock seemed to slow down. Sarah Brooks had been on the road for hours, her black SUV cutting through endless stretches of farmland and sleepy towns where time seemed to have forgotten. Her destination? Home. But first, a pit stop. She eased the car into the cracked lot of a rundown gas station off Route 24. The place looked like it hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint in decades. The faded signs creaked in the wind, the soda machine sagged like it was leaning too far to the left, and the smell of grease mixed with the sharp tang of pine. It was the kind of place most people would pass right by. But for Sarah, it was just another stop on the long road ahead. She stepped out of the SUV, stretching her tired legs and popping the gas cap with a sigh of relief. The gravel beneath her boots crunched, breaking the eerie silence that had wrapped around her like a blanket. Without looking up, Sarah began to pump gas, her movements slow and deliberate. She didn't need to see the approaching vehicle to know what it was. She had heard that unmistakable sound too many times before. The low growl of tires crunching gravel, the whine of a police cruiser coming to a halt. The door slammed open, and a heavy-set figure emerged. Deputy Kyle Riker. His boots scuffed, his arms thick with muscle, his buzz cut sharp and uncompromising. He was a man used to power, and he immediately assessed Sarah with the cold indifference of someone who felt entitled to do so. This was it. Sarah could feel the tension building in the air, thickening with each step he took toward her. The sun blazed high in the sky, casting a relentless golden light that bathed everything in its path. Sarah had been on the road for hours, her tires humming steadily across the worn asphalt, cutting through stretches of farmland and sleepy little towns that seemed to never wake up. The air was thick with heat, and the landscape, a blur of endless fields and quiet country roads, felt like it was pulling her deeper into a forgotten corner of the world. She wasn't in a hurry. Not today. She just wanted to get home, to be somewhere familiar, somewhere where the weight of the road would finally fall off her shoulders. The gas station she pulled into was just another stop, another small break before the final stretch. The building looked as though it had seen better days, paint peeling from the walls, a soda machine leaning crooked, and an old, rusted pickup truck parked in the corner, half its windows down. The air smelled of stale grease and pine, the kind of smell that clung to the skin, too real to be ignored. Sarah stepped out of her vehicle with a quiet sigh, stretching her back and pulling her jacket tighter against the chill that still clung to the edges of the day. She didn't need to look up to know the sound of a car approaching. The crunch of gravel beneath tires was unmistakable, and as the cruiser slowed to a stop, she could feel the presence of another person behind her, their eyes already assessing her every move. She turned her head just slightly, taking in the heavy-set figure of the officer stepping out of the vehicle. His boots were worn, his arms thick with muscle, and his buzz cut gave him a look of sharp authority. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. He was Deputy Kyle Riker, and he was about to make his move. The moment hung in the air, charged with something Sarah could already sense, but hadn't yet seen. She didn't flinch. She didn't need to. The crunch of gravel underfoot echoed louder as the deputy's boots hit the earth. Sarah's grip tightened around the nozzle of the gas pump, her fingers steady despite the growing tension. She didn't look up, but she could feel his presence closing in, his eyes already sizing her up like she was something out of place, something worth questioning. The cruiser's engine idled, a low, menacing hum that seemed to vibrate through the air, adding weight to the stillness. Finally, she heard it. The sound of the door creaking open, the heavy shuffle of boots against gravel. Deputy Kyle Riker stood there, towering over her, his bulk blocking out the faint sunlight. The air seemed to grow thicker around them, his presence filling the space between them like a wall. He didn't speak at first, just eyed her with the cold detachment of someone used to feeling in control, used to having the upper hand. She could tell immediately he was one of those who believed power was his to command. "You lost, ma'am?" His voice dragged like rough gravel, low and measured, but there was no warmth behind it, no politeness. Just an edge. Sarah turned slowly, her movements deliberate, keeping her hands where he could see them. Her gaze met his, unflinching, calm as still water. Just getting gas, she said, her voice firm, friendly even, but there was no mistaking the quiet authority in it. Riker's eyes narrowed, scanning her up and down, as if the simple act of pumping gas was a crime in itself. He took a step closer, the shift in his body language unmistakable. "Let me see your ID," he said, his tone no longer a question, but a command. Her heartbeat quickened, but only slightly. The air between them thickened, tension thick as smoke. Sarah didn't hesitate. She reached into her jacket pocket, pulled out her driver's license, and handed it to him, her fingers steady despite the growing knot in her stomach. He grabbed it from her like it was something dirty, something beneath him. He read her name aloud, the words falling from his lips like a curse. "Sarah Brooks, huh?" She didn't flinch. Instead, she met his gaze, her voice sharp and steady. "Is there a problem, Deputy?" she asked, the words barely more than a whisper, but they carried the weight of a challenge. Riker stepped closer, his chest puffing out. "What are you really doing here, Miss Brooks?" he demanded, his voice rising just a fraction, as if daring her to answer. The tension in the air was palpable now, thick with unspoken hostility. Sarah could feel it, the way his eyes drilled into her, like she was something to be taken down, like her every move was being scrutinized, dissected. She kept her body still, every muscle taut, ready for whatever came next. He was pushing, probing for a response, testing the waters to see how far he could take it. And she was about to find out just how deep his arrogance ran. "I asked you a question, Miss Brooks," Riker said, his voice low, his tone no longer friendly, no longer even polite. He stepped closer, his presence like a shadow looming over her. She could smell the sweat, the musk of his uniform, and something deeper, a sense of entitlement, of superiority that filled the space between them. Sarah didn't move. She didn't flinch. She wasn't afraid of him. Not yet. But she could feel the line being drawn, the moment when this would turn into something more than a casual stop at a gas station. "I'm just getting gas," she said, her voice calm, but with an edge that matched his. "Is there something else you need, Deputy?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took another step, bringing his body so close that she could feel the heat radiating off him. "I don't like your attitude, Miss Brooks," he growled, his words like a threat. And just as he spoke, he shoved her. Hard. His shoulder hit hers with a force that sent her staggering back against the side of her SUV. The metal of the door dug into her back, but she didn't fall. She caught herself, her hand bracing against the door, her eyes narrowing. "That's unnecessary," Sarah said, her voice cold, sharp, a clear warning. But Riker wasn't done. He shoved her again, this time with more force, sending his booted foot into the space between them. "I don't take kindly to being challenged," he said, and without another word, he reached into the open passenger door and began rifling through her glove box, her private space, her things. His hands moved recklessly, tossing aside receipts and papers as if it were his right to invade her life, to go through her things without hesitation. The heat of anger rose inside her, but she stayed still. Her years in the field had taught her one thing above all: survive first, respond later. "My registration's in there," she said, trying to keep the situation calm. "Top folder," she added, hoping to diffuse the situation. Riker paused just for a second before he snatched the folder from the glove box. He crumpled it in his hand and turned to face her, his expression one of disgust. "This ain't over," he sneered, but before Sarah could respond, he raised his boot and kicked her, hard, straight in the shin. The crack of impact echoed through the lot. Sarah gasped, the sudden rush of pain stunning her for a moment, but she didn't go down. She wouldn't. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. The pain exploded in her leg, sharp and blinding, as Riker's boot slammed into her shin. The sound of the kick, like the crack of a whip, reverberated through the empty gas station lot, and for a moment, everything stood still. Sarah stumbled, the force of the blow throwing her off balance. The gravel scraped against her knees as she fell, a rush of heat flooding her body. She gasped, the world spinning for a split second, but then she gritted her teeth, feeling the sting of both the injury and the humiliation. Riker stood over her, his smirk wide, eyes narrowed with cruel satisfaction. "That's where you belong," he sneered, his voice dripping with disdain as he towered over her, the power of his position evident in every word. He stepped back, a look of finality on his face as he turned away, dismissing her as though she were nothing more than an obstacle in his path. His heavy boots crunched across the gravel as he headed back toward his cruiser, the engine roaring to life like a final insult. For a heartbeat, Sarah stayed there, her chest heaving with the effort to control her breathing. Her knee burned like fire, a raw ache radiating through her leg, but she wouldn't let herself stay down. She couldn't. Not like this. Not after everything. Her fingers scraped the ground as she pushed herself up, palm to the rough gravel, each movement slow but deliberate. She could feel the eyes on her, but she refused to let them see her falter. The teenager who had been stacking crates just moments before stood frozen, his phone held low, camera still recording. His hands trembled, but his eyes were steady as he watched her fight to rise, unsure but determined to do the right thing. Sarah's fingers brushed against the dirt as she slowly retrieved her ID, still lying where it had fallen in the wake of Riker's assault. She didn't waste time dusting it off. Her phone buzzed in her jacket, the message clear before she even glanced at the screen. Everything was about to change. She straightened, standing tall despite the throb of pain in her leg. She wasn't finished yet, not by a long shot. She met the teenager's eyes for a moment, her gaze steady, unyielding. "Send that footage to the news," she said softly, her voice firm. To everyone. And with that, the storm began to take shape. Sarah stood there, breath shallow, her pulse pounding in her ears. Her shin throbbed like a furnace, the pain radiating through her leg in waves, but it was the insult that burned deeper. She had been kicked, humiliated, treated like less than a person, and not just by anyone, but by a man who wore the badge of law enforcement. She clenched her jaw, her knuckles white as she grasped the edge of the SUV for support. She wanted to scream, to lash out, but she didn't. She couldn't. The gravel crunched under Riker's boots as he climbed back into his cruiser, the engine roaring to life with a sickening finality. The tires spit gravel as he peeled out of the lot, dust swirling in his wake. It was over for him, but not for her. Not by a long shot. Sarah took a steadying breath, her hands still trembling slightly as she reached down to retrieve her ID from the ground. She brushed off the dirt, her fingers lingering on the edges of the laminated card for just a moment longer than necessary. Her knee screamed in protest, but she ignored it. She was already moving, already thinking 3 steps ahead. The air around her felt heavy with the weight of what had just happened. She could feel the eyes of the teenager who had filmed the whole thing, watching her, waiting for her to do something. His phone was still in his hand, and Sarah knew that the footage wasn't just a video anymore. It was evidence, and that evidence would bring the storm that was coming. She met his gaze, her expression calm, but the fire inside her was starting to burn bright. "Send that footage to the news," she said, her voice steady, but carrying the weight of someone who knew exactly what kind of power she was about to unleash. The kid nodded, his hands now more confident, as he quickly began to upload the video. With a glance at the horizon, Sarah made her way back to her SUV, every step sending a new wave of pain through her leg. But she didn't stop. She didn't hesitate. She was already thinking about the next move, already planning how to take this beyond just one deputy's mistake. This was bigger. This was about a system, and she was going to bring it down. Sarah's hand gripped the steering wheel as she pulled away from the gas station, the engine humming beneath her, but her mind was far from the road. The weight of what had just happened still hung in the air like smoke, and her knee burned with every press of the pedal. But it wasn't the pain that fueled her now. It was the insult. The way Riker had dismissed her as nothing more than a target, a woman he could push around. He had no idea who he'd just messed with. No idea what was about to unfold. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, but she didn't reach for it. Not yet. She knew who it was. It was the call she was waiting for, the one that would set everything in motion. The road stretched ahead, quiet and empty, but Sarah's thoughts were already racing, weaving a plan in her mind. She wasn't just going to let this slide. This wasn't just about her and that arrogant deputy. It was about something bigger. The system that had allowed him to act that way, the people who had turned a blind eye, the power that had been unchecked for far too long. Her phone buzzed again, this time more urgently. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled it out, the screen flashing with an encrypted message. She answered immediately, her voice cool, controlled, like steel wrapped in velvet. "This is Brooks." "Are you all right?" The voice on the other end crackled with concern. It was Olson? Her colleague in DC, a voice she trusted, a voice that knew exactly how high the stakes were. "I'm fine," Sarah replied. "But we've got a problem. Deputy Kyle Riker just assaulted me, kicked me. It's on a civilian's phone." There was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath. "Get me his full file. Complaints, disciplinary records, partner list, everything. On it," Sarah said, hanging up. She didn't waste another second. Her hands moved quickly, pulling up the necessary files, her mind already shifting into overdrive. This wasn't just about getting even. It was about exposing the rot that ran deep in Benton County, about showing the world the truth. She didn't drive straight home. Not yet. Instead, she headed for a quiet diner just off the highway, the kind of place where the world could feel a million miles away. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered above her, casting long shadows on the cracked tiles. The waitress didn't ask questions, just brought her a cup of coffee and a slice of pie, like she knew Sarah needed a moment to think. But Sarah wasn't here to rest. She was here to plan. And with each passing minute, the pieces were falling into place. The storm was coming, and it was going to hit hard. The quiet hum of the diner felt like the calm before the storm. Sarah stared out the window, her fingers wrapped around the warm mug of coffee, the steam curling up like the tendrils of her thoughts. The ache in her knee had intensified, but it barely registered now. She was focused on the bigger picture. The phone in her pocket buzzed again, and this time it was Marcus. She answered without hesitation, her voice sharp, cutting through the fog of her thoughts. "You're viral?" Marcus said before she could even speak. "The video's everywhere. 1 million hits already. Riker's name's trending." Sarah's gaze shifted to the window, her eyes narrowing as she saw the first signs of the firestorm she knew was coming. "Good," she said, her voice cold and measured, though the edges of it hummed with something sharper, something calculated. "I need Riker's full file. Every complaint, every piece of dirt on him. I want the history, the partners, the supervisors who let this happen. And don't stop there. Get me Sheriff Linda Calkins' record. She's not clean. I know she's not." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Marcus's voice, calm as ever. "I'm on it." She hung up, her eyes never leaving the road outside. The storm had been unleashed, and now it was about to gain momentum. Sarah wasn't the type to shy away from confrontation. She thrived in it. But this was bigger than just one officer's abuse of power. This was about a network of corruption that stretched far beyond Benton County, a network that had been allowed to grow, unchecked, for years. Her phone buzzed again, this time with an encrypted message. She opened it without delay, her fingers moving fast as she read the details. The pieces were falling into place, the evidence mounting. The video had done its job. Now, she was going to finish what it started. With her knee throbbing and the weight of the case pressing against her chest, Sarah finished her coffee and stood up. She wasn't leaving this fight to the authorities, to the system that had failed her. She was going to take this all the way to the top. No more waiting, no more second chances for those who thought they were untouchable. The diner door swung open behind her, and she stepped out into the night, her mind already 5 moves ahead. The storm was coming for them. And she was going to make sure it didn't miss. The world outside seemed to pulse with an electric charge, the hum of anticipation hanging heavy in the air. By the time Sarah pulled into the FBI field office in Jefferson City, everything had already shifted. The video of the assault had taken on a life of its own, spreading like wildfire across every platform. Twitter was ablaze with hashtags, news outlets were running the footage on repeat, and her phone was a nonstop torrent of notifications. The whole world had seen the deputy's boot slam into her shin. Now they were demanding answers. As she stepped out of the SUV, her legs still throbbing but her stride unwavering, Sarah could feel the weight of the moment. The air was thick with the promise of change. The kind of change that came when a system, long rotten and left unchecked, was finally exposed. She had fought for justice before, but this time, the fight wasn't just for her. It was for everyone who had been swept aside by the same corrupt forces that had allowed Riker to act without consequence. Inside the building, her colleagues were already buzzing with activity. The energy was tense, focused, everyone understanding that this was more than just another case. It was a reckoning. Sarah's eyes scanned the room, settling on the files stacked high on her desk, the weight of them a reflection of the work ahead. But she wasn't daunted. This was what she did. This was what she had trained for. Marcus texted her just as she sat down, the message short and blunt. Riker's file's ready. His history's a disaster. Sarah didn't need to read it. She knew what she was going to find. She had seen it before. The pattern. The stories of abuse and corruption that were buried under layers of bureaucracy and silence. But today, that silence was over. Today, Riker and everyone who had protected him would be held accountable. Sarah cracked her knuckles, the sharp sound breaking the stillness of the room. She wasn't just about to bring down one deputy. She was about to tear apart the system that had made him feel invincible. The storm had started with a kick, but it would end with a takedown, and she was ready to see it through. The courtroom was buzzing with reporters, activists, and locals. Everywhere Sarah looked, there were eyes on her, waiting for her next move. The bright lights of cameras flashed like a strobe, catching every inch of her as she walked toward the podium, her badge gleaming on her belt. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, but she didn't waver. She'd been in rooms like this before, but never quite like this. Today wasn't just about her. It was about exposing the rot that had festered in Benton County for far too long. She took a breath, letting the hum of the crowd fade into the background, focusing only on what mattered. She stepped up to the microphone, her hands steady at her sides, and she paused, letting the silence stretch for just a moment longer than necessary. The crowd quieted, waiting for her to speak. "My name is Sarah Brooks," she began, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the tension in the room. "I am the FBI chief for the Midwestern Division. I have served this country for 26 years. I have taken down drug cartels, dismantled trafficking rings, and fought corruption in the highest offices." She let the words sit, feeling the power of them settle into the room. "But yesterday," she continued, her voice hardening, "I was assaulted in broad daylight by a uniformed officer. I was kicked by a deputy who didn't care who I was, didn't ask questions, didn't check facts. He saw a black woman and decided to take me down." A murmur ran through the crowd, but Sarah didn't flinch. She was only getting started. "I didn't tell him who I was because I wanted to see how far he would go," she said, her gaze sharp as a blade. "And he went all the way. He shoved me. He kicked me. And then he walked away like it was nothing. But this isn't just about one man. It's about the system that allowed him to think this was acceptable." She let the words hang in the air, each one a blow to the foundation of the corrupt machine she had uncovered. "This isn't law enforcement. This is complicity." The crowd erupted. Cheers, shouts, applause. But Sarah stood still, her face unreadable. This wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. The fight had just started, and she wasn't backing down.